outside of Dayton. Michael Ratner is the president of the Center for Constitutional Rights, a nonprofit human rights litigation organization deeply involved in defending human rights. During the post-9/11 period, the Center's litigation has included the first representation of the Guantanamo detainees, challenges to the Patriot Act, and the first case against the practice of rendition on behalf of Canadian citizen Mamilla. In the past, Mr. Ratner acted as a principal counsel in the successful suit to close the camp for HIV-positive Haitian refugees on Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and has litigated numerous cases opposing U.S.-initiated wars from Central America to Iraq. His latest books are International Human Rights Litigation in U.S. Courts and The Prosecution of Donald Rumsfeld, a prosecution by book. He is a graduate of the Columbia Law School and has taught human rights at Columbia and Yale. And you're about to hear from one of the 100 most influential lawyers in the court in the country, according to the National Law Journal. So, this is Michael Ratner.
Good to be here and see such a good crowd. I want to say to begin with, we have a couple of the organizers, maybe more, of the Mamilla campaign. One is Dennis in the back. If there's any others, they should raise their hand. If you want to work on it, you should. See Dennis afterwards. And you can also go to the two websites, which are really excellent. The mamillacampaign.org is one, where you'll see the full petition, all kinds of action stuff, and a petition to sign in many different languages. You can also go to the Center for Constitutional website, ccrjustice.org, which also has the full petition and a petition to sign as well. One thing where she didn't say, I'm glad he at least admitted he was a client of mine, that his family is buried, or his ancestors are buried in the Mamilla Cemetery. And one thing he didn't mention is that most of the work on the petition, and it's a really fabulous document with amazing appendixes of pictures of what the cemetery looks like, was done by his lawyer daughter, Dima Galidi. And it's a fantastic job. I mean, we just sat there and sort of, rearranged the paragraphs occasionally. But Dima did a really terrific job on it. I hadn't been to Israel, Palestine, since probably 1958 or 59. And I decided this year, my children said, let's go on the Gaza Freedom March. And I know some of the organizers, I see Helen Schiff is here, one of the organizers. And I said, let's try and go to Gaza. And of course, we didn't get into Gaza. So then we flew to Israel and went immediately into East Jerusalem. And I took my two children, 19 and 22. And of course, what I saw in East Jerusalem is I can describe it. It's not the subject of this talk. It was really astonishingly upsetting for all of us and my children, of course, as well. We did, because I was already beginning to work on the Mamilla Cemetery case, we went into West Jerusalem to have a look at what we were working on. And when we first looked at the case at the center, we said, well, okay, it's, compared to our cases, representing Rachel Corey's family after she was killed, or the bombings in Gaza, or some other things, this didn't seem like the most important major issue. But as I looked at it more and more, and as I had a visit, and as Rashid has pointed out, it really stands for a lot of what is going on and a lot of depredations by Israel that are currently occurring. And so one afternoon we took ourselves over to the Mamilla Cemetery, and I was utterly astonished, really, by what I saw. As people who have been there probably know much better than I, but it's in this corner of Jerusalem. But of course, there's the American embassy there, consulate, the King David
Embassy in Jerusalem.
Right, the King David goes up the hill. And then it's at a corner called the Soho of Jerusalem, which is sort of, like, not exactly like our Soho, but nice winding cobble streets and little shops and all this. And then you get there, and you go through a road that cuts through the middle of what was the old cemetery. And on the left, you see what Rashid referred to as Hatikva Park, which you can still see mausoleums underground, that's where the soil goes over it, Independence Park. And on the right, the first thing you see is a fence that's literally almost as high as this room. It's got to be 25 feet high. white metal fence surrounding what is to be the site of the Simon Wiesenthal Center for Tolerance, with guards everywhere. You can't see into it. There's cameras all around. And then adjacent to it, as Rashid described from the 80s, and it's still the case today, is what's left of the old 33-acre cemetery, a few acres of desecration. That's all you can say. Of old bottles, of the Israelis having run pipes through it, of tombs thrown over, of something that just, you look at it and you say, how can this be that a Muslim cemetery that goes back to at least the 13th century, if not before, 12th century, how can it be that this has happened right here? And how can they be putting a center of tolerance on top of a Muslim cemetery? And when you see the grave, and you'll see the pictures, it's the graves run right up against the wall of the Simon Wiesenthal Center site. And they obviously, as the archaeologist points out, run under the wall as well. And you know, you go and you look at that and you're just astonished that they not only want to, rid Western Jerusalem, if not Jerusalem itself, of as many Palestinians as they can, but they want to also eliminate the idea that there were ever Muslims living in Jerusalem, and eliminate the memory of it by getting rid of first that part of the cemetery, and then presumably this next few acres that are left, which is a remnant. How long that will survive in that condition, I don't know. And when I ask people why isn't it fixed up? Why don't the Muslim people in Jerusalem come and fix it? And of course, every time they do, either they get kicked off, arrested, or it gets desecrated again after they fix up the grave. And I said to myself, well, look, at whatever the merits of this, let's look at the merits for a second, and we'll talk about that in this petition we filed. Whatever the Simon Wiesenthal Center says, which is there were no protests by the Palestinians and the Muslims, this has no historical value, no archaeological value. They give all these reasons for why they think they should be able to build. Let's even assume for a second that there's some merit, which there isn't to any of those arguments. Let's assume there is. Why in the heck would they still want to put the Simon Wiesenthal Center for Tolerance on top of a Muslim cemetery? It seems completely nonsensical unless they're just trying to shove it into the face, really, of every Palestinian and every Muslim living in Palestine and Israel. Because it doesn't make any sense. Israel, Jerusalem, the mayor of Jerusalem, even offered alternative sites for the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And yet, somehow, Israel and the center insist that they want to take this spot. And what you have to conclude is they want to take this spot, and then they want to take the next spot, and the next spot. Otherwise, they would move this center to another place. So it's clear that they want to eradicate the presence, really, of Muslims in Jerusalem. The attempts to stop the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the desecration of the cemetery have been going on for a long time. There was a case brought, as Rashid mentioned, it was first came to the Sharia court in Jerusalem. Is that where it is? In Jerusalem. It won. It said you have to stop. And then, of course, it was appealed by the Wiesenthal Center to the Israeli Supreme Court, where the case lost not once, but it lost twice. And it lost twice, really, for various legal reasons, but obviously underlying political reasons. And the legal reasons, as Rashid mentioned, where the court said there's no archaeological or scientific value to what their Simon Wiesenthal Center is building on, and coupled with the failure to protest by the Muslims over the years, we're going to decide that the building is much more important than whatever remains there, because there was a lack of protest, because there's no legal or scientific evidence. Now,